Yes, as you like.
Hello, I am Chloé Maurel, historian, and today I received Professor Bob Reinalda. Hello, Bob Reinalda. You are fellow and senior researcher at Radboud University, Nijmegen, Netherlands. You work on international organizations. You published several books like The Routledge History of International Organization, and you are co-editor of the Biographical Dictionary of Secretaries-General of International Organizations, IO-BIO, which is published online. Can you explain us how came to you the idea of the Biographical Dictionary of Secretaries-General of International Organizations, please?
Yes, thank you for the invitation. And well, it started with writing a history of international organizations. And then, having finished it, I found out there were only a few lines about some people, some persons, some individuals who actually were very important at a certain moment. But you can spend only 2 or 3 lines to what they did. And then I started thinking about the group of secretary generals, or more generally, executive heads. What do we know about them? Where are they from? How were they educated? Did they have any diplomatic experience? Did they come from the army? Did they know many other people? Did they have international relations? Or how did they become involved in international activities? About a group, we don't know so
Yes.
much. So, so being an editor of a biographical dictionary here in the Netherlands on the workers' movement, you know, one morning under the shower, I thought, why don't we create a kind of dictionary, biographical dictionary of executive heads, of IOs. So that's how it all started.
Yes. And
And
how did you implement this project? I know that it is an international collaboration. You have authors from different countries. How did you supervise and oversee the realization of the project?
well, we started with some people, a panel at the International Studies Association. I think it was in 2010. And we invited several people to participate in the panel. And then we asked them to give their opinion about all kinds of editorial questions, who to include, only secretary generals, or also going down into the bureaucracy, but we decided to remain to that. Then we organized a small editorial group. So it's done together with Kent Kelly, who is from the College of Wooster in Ohio, United States, and Jackie Eisenberg of the Graduate Institute in Geneva. And we thought we stay a small group, we make a simple outline. We have a website at the university, and we do most of the work ourselves. So we had a call, we visited panels, or we created panels at international conferences, the ISA, ACUNS, the Academic Council of the United Nations system, few other conferences, and also personal networks, you know, for one reason or another. I have a kind of French network resulting from the fact that I was an Erasmus teacher at Grenoble for many years at Sciences Po. So we had our call distributed widely, and we received a lot of people wanting to collaborate. So we have a procedure, we have all our instructions, We have a procedure to discuss the text and to see if we get everything in. And we ask experts about the quality of text because they are experts for a certain organization or a field of international relations. So that's how we work. And we did it intentionally on a small scale because we thought there is not so much done in this respect. So let's try out and see what we find in the end.
Yes. And what are the advantages of publishing each biography online? And how many biographies do you have right now?
Yeah. So one of the things of having, of publishing on the internet, open access, is that it's free for everyone and we get reactions in two forms. We have comments. Sometimes there is a mistake, could be a small thing like a wrong year, or we are told that there is more information in a certain publication that we missed or something like that. It brings in authors, and another aspect, it's cheap. So that helps. But then there are things that happen that you did not invent in the beginning, and that is that some teachers use our by now about 85 entries, and there's a database of all Secretaries-Generals that we know, and they use it in class for several reasons. First of all, Secretary-General can be a very nice inroad into what is happening within an organization. And that's one thing. And the second thing is you can compare different organizations. Is there a different procedure for selecting, and how did it work out in certain cases? So eventually we want to have a book project, but open access is very flexible. And for example, people in Latin America who have far more restricted access to certain sources can easily use it. And I was surprised to find out that some people were using it and informed us about other people also using it.
Yes.
So
Yes.
one of the elements that makes it a good project.
And to your mind, did the persons of the Secretary-General with their own personalities and political opinions have a personal influence on their international organization? Can you give one or two examples of the influence of the personality of the SJ?
Yeah, well, I would even put it in a stronger form. Every organization depends on the leading person. So you could argue there is leadership, both internally and externally, that is important. And one of the things, for example, on the internal side, is that a Secretary-General must motivate his or her personnel to work for the organization. Now, if I take a very general topic, the UN Secretary-General is both a political leader and an administrative leader. Now, Pérez de Cuéllar was an excellent diplomat. He was in control of everything, but he was a very poor administrator. Financial knowledge absent, to put it mildly. Yes. So he was very poor in that respect, and that also caused trouble for the UN Secretariat. In other cases, you can argue that certain Secretary-General is working for the organization, improving it, helping it to go through a very difficult moment, the Second World War, the ILO, for example. If you are able to continue a small secretariat and continue the activities during the war period and the start of a new period, then it's very important that you have that. And there are many differences also when you would look at regional economic organizations of the UN. When you look at Asia, or the Asian Pacific region, ESCAP, all the executive secretaries over there had strong regional connections before they started the job. In Africa, they start these regional connections once they became the executive secretary. So there are all kinds of difference that you can see. And here you also have demonstrated that the project is not only interesting for one individual, but also for groups of individuals.
Yes. Reading your dictionary, we observe that there are very few women as SG in the history. Can you all the same give one or two examples of women leading international organizations in your dictionary? I think, yes.
Yeah. So secretariats of international organizations are men's world. From the beginning, when you see it, it's the men who obviously get the top positions, and the women are working already at the lower levels. It's negative in a certain way, but you could also argue, when you look at the women working at the League of Nations Secretariat in the administrative functions, at the time, it was an opportunity to work in such a situation. But of course, there was the glass ceiling. And that is a difficulty for the post-war period. When you go into the UN Secretariat, you will see that there is a constant action by women to increase the number of women slowly going on to higher levels, and in the end they are successful. Yes. So what we see is that women who reach a top position, Brundtland is a good example, that they have to be very strong in their leadership, and some of these women are able to do that. So there is a kind of progress. We are happy to have some women in it, and also to be able to demonstrate how certain women moved into the organization, also showing what kind of capacities they brought with them, and how they succeeded in selection processes where you had all kind of power relations, lack of support, or just created some support. So that's part of it. When you go into our dictionary, into several of these entries, you can see that this is both a fact that there are few women, but also how things are changing.
Yes. Your dictionary covers all international organizations, from the most famous, the UN, to the less famous. Can you cite one or two unrecognized international organizations and explain how, all the same, they played a real role in the international relations?
Yeah, so unimportant, or maybe very important at the time. So take the European Commission for the Danube, 1856, led by a man, John Stokes, who proved to be a leader able to arrange very practical work. They changed the mouth of a river, so they are huge infrastructural works, but they also had to take care of the legal situation. So there was international law in its early forms, and we had Ottoman law, and he was from the United Kingdom. But here you can see a very interesting conflict which arose because there were 7 commissioners, and Britain was the informal leader because of the strong position, the hegemon at the time in international relations. And one night at a dinner, they found out that 4 of the 7 had been instructed to stop the works they had started. And each of the 4 had decided to ignore the instructions of their government. Because what was their argument? They said, we are working for the commission, for the Danube Commission, and not for our government. So that's a very essential moment. And John Stokes has the support. He is also, he has the capacities to lead, enough charisma, all kind of tech. He was a technician, so he had all these technical expertise that he needed, but also all the legal expertise and good connections with the government in London. So he managed to make it into a longer existing organization. The GET was a general agreement, no international organization. But Eric Wyndham White was the executive secretary. And he did a very uncommon work because he tried to create the agreement and make it function and increase it. So you had these negotiation rounds, which he initiated, where he invented all kinds of things to overcome a situation where they could not take a decision. So he invented what you call the green room. Well, that was a room because everything was green in there and they called it the green. But what he did, he said, okay, the 2 of you or the 3 of you, you cannot agree. Try to see if you can find out. Okay, he was very dominant when it was necessary. He was very lenient when not. And in fact, he slowly created a secretariat, or you could even say an international secretariat, which did not exist before. And he made it, and then later on, they had a small staff, but then they needed a building of their own, etc., etc. And then it became the WTO, just make a green line. But you need a person like Eric Wyndham White to get a result like this. Yeah?
Yes. And are you planning to publish your biographical dictionary in paper book in a few years, maybe?
Yes, that's about the planning. We've already discussed with a publisher, but there should be a book publication, but we also want to continue in our open access format. So there is a difficulty. We still have to provide for an internet and printed version combination together. But we will solve that. Yes, we want that, but we also want to have the benefits of the open access process.
Last question. Can you tell us about your new forthcoming book, International Secretariats by Routledge in its Global Institutions series, to be published in a few months, I think?
Yeah, in October this year. Well, this was a result. At first, I wrote a history of international organizations since 1815. Then I had this idea about a biographical dictionary, but going into all the details of all these individual leaders, I had a new research question. To what extent is a secretariat, an international secretariat, helping leaders to lead the organization? both internally and externally, or in which ways is it a problematic side? Is it not an opportunity? Yeah. So that was a new research question. And then I wanted to know, when did we have the first international civil servants? You know, the general idea is 1945 is the UN, 1919 is the League of Nations. Before that, well, not so interesting. And you have this idea, like in 1919 in Versailles, you know, the sky opened, a hand came out and it said, here is the International Secretariat, use it. Okay, it was used by the League of Nations and it was recreated by the United Nations system. So I wanted to know what was before. And then I went back into all these river commissions. The Rhine River Commission was the first one, then the Danube, the public international unions like the International Telegraph Union. And then I found out they all had international functionaries. So it was for the directors, for the international inspectors and the river inspectors and the judges. There was also a legal system for the Rhine system. They were all international functionaries. So I went back in time. And then you could argue, what is the most unknown name in international organization? That is Charles Coquebert de Montbray. He invented this. And this was in a bilateral organization between Napoleonic France and the German Empire, or the remnants of it, in 1805, when there was a small bureaucracy created to deal with all the transport problems, the trade problems on the River Rhine between France and Germany. And he invented a small bureaucracy with international civil servants, or that's not a term for that time, so it's better use the term international functionaries. Mm-hmm. And that was transformed from this small binational bureaucracy to the Rhine Commission. Mm-hmm. And then you can see that all the time there are international functionaries. Mm-hmm. And then when we have the first Public International Union, the ITU, there is no secretariat, but there is an officer, a functionary, and he starts to create a secretariat. Now, why is this, when you see it in a historical perspective? Before, you would have international conferences, and they would move from one country to another country. So there was a kind of activity, and then each country would arrange it in its own ways. But that created a problem because you lost all the expertise when it moved to another country. Now you could solve this problem by creating an international secretariat which is in one place. Okay, you choose a neutral small country, Belgium or Switzerland, even more than Belgium, and then you give a kind of oversight function to the government of Switzerland. That worked well to a certain extent, but in practice there were also problems. The major one, that if you contacted, and the Secretariat contacted one of the member countries, it went through the government of Switzerland. That doesn't work for problematic issues. And then they created another element, another body of an international organization, and that is a governmental board. And that would supervise the secretariats between the general assemblies. So in fact, when the ITU was created and it started to function, thanks to the leadership, we had two new bodies, an international secretariat and a governing body. And the later public international unions used the model of a governmental board. So that is one of the things that I argue about the 19th century. And then of course, 1919, it didn't come from above, it came from the organizational experience. Drummond, Eric Drummond, the first Secretary-General of the League of Nations, is known for having introduced it. But in fact, it was a debate. And in this debate, Maurice Hankey was his opponent, who proposed a completely different model. But one of the negotiators, one of the civil servants in Versailles, James Salter, had worked with the Hankey model during the First World War, and he knew that it didn't function well. So he intervened, and in the end, you can argue it's this Salter-Drummond combination that created the idea of an international secretariat. The civil servants are working for the organization and not for their country of origin. And then you can see that this is being reproduced in the United Nations system and in other organizations. So I try to show this kind of emergence of international civil servants and of international secretariats and its evolution.
Okay, yes, that is very interesting. So
2 centuries of history.
Yes, so thank you very much, Professor Bob Reinalda, and looking forward to read your next book. Thank you.
Thank you.